So we have Hugo, Dan, and Ben. Rather than me read off the words, maybe I could ask you each to introduce yourself. So Dan, if I could start with you, please.
So my name is Dan Freidinburg. I do privacy and security engineering at Google and work in the entire space of this network of things.
I'm Hugo Fiennes. I was on stage just about 20 minutes ago. My company makes a platform for connecting things to the internet.
Thank you.
Excuse me. I'm Ben Werther. I was on earlier today as well. So a founder and CEO of Platfora, big data analytics.
Thank you all. So in terms of that, I guess that opening question about is the IoT secure? Can we make it ever secure? I mean, what are your views? Hey, Dan.
Absolutely. I think that securing the Internet of Things is just as feasible and realistic as securing the web architecture and other platforms that are out there. It requires, obviously, unique challenges and overcoming those unique challenges. But when you apply a rigorous amount of good privacy and security engineering to that space, you can solve those problems.
I think it's completely possible as well. I think some of the problems with that are the fact that people making products often don't think about it. That's the thing, and it has to be security is something that has to be built in from the ground up. And if people don't think at the beginning, then they can ship something. And the problem is with those devices is they're out there then, and you can have insecurities in a home based on a product that was shipped 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, I think from any one vendor producing devices, if they're careful about it, they can build a secure platform. I think the bigger threat is, or the question is, organizations, homes, or factories or other places where there's just a proliferation of different devices from different vendors, and you now have companies that had entirely different levels of care about security, and so now if consumers or businesses don't differentiate, if they don't understand, then they may be at risk in some context, either from a security or privacy perspective, through some of those devices.
Mm-hmm.
So if I might give an example, the Internet of Things includes so many different topics. It's a very broad term.
Yep.
It's even like a marketing-oriented term that encompasses so many other things, including autonomous vehicles, wearables, home automation, your mobile phone even. And each of those areas has their own challenges, right? And if you look at things like autonomous vehicles or smart homes, if you want to put microphones on these devices in order to collect lots of sensitive information or to collect any information, then you need to look at what is the purpose or reason that you're putting these microphones on there. And you can do a lot of interesting things if you think about it in advance and you apply good privacy and security rigor to it. So for example, if you're trying to have you're putting microphones on to respond to emergency vehicles, then you can splice the data to only look at the frequency that sirens sound at, so that what you end up with is either no data or, yes, there's a siren going off, as opposed to having a microphone with all kinds of data. So I think that approach of really looking at what problem you're trying to solve in advance, looking at that thoroughly, is how you prevent yourself from collecting too much information and ending up in a dangerous spot.
Yeah. And I think the other key thing to go with that is also clearly the transparency in terms of the data that is being collected, why it's being collected, and sharing that with the relevant people that need to know about that. Because I think historically we've seen that may be missing in some instances in those early days of collecting data and utilizing that data. So in terms of data, and maybe if I can turn to yourself, Ben, on this point, I mean, as we start to connect all of this, these things together, these 50 billion devices that's being talked about in the next couple of years together, how do we also ensure that the integrity of that data, so particularly if you're talking about things like the health example that we had earlier on,
yeah.
If important decisions are being made based on that data, how does the person looking at it make sure that they're actually comfortable that that data is genuine?
Yeah, it's a really intriguing question, because you're going back to really the lineage of where that data is being collected. Yep. Do you trust those devices? I mean, I think that as decisions are made downstream, it becomes very important that you understand, like maybe the sensitivity of the data collection, the vendors associated with it, with their trusted paths to get that data in, collect the data, and so it does create an interesting world where as a consumer of services based on that data, or as a business building on those data feeds, you need to know a lot about what you're ingesting and utilizing, because It's a magnified version of the challenge we have today more generally, which is companies are generating and capturing data, and there's data quality issues, and there's questions of lineage and sort of the correctness, and now you've just magnified that at 1,000-fold. So I think these are tractable problems, but I think that you could easily see people going off the rails and misusing data because they don't understand the source.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms, Hugo, of from a platform perspective, because again, you're collecting a lot of data there. You're having to do so in a secure way. I mean, how did you design that with security in mind? I'm guessing you started with that as a fundamental.
I mean, actually, our fundamental premise is that we don't collect data. The data flows through.
Yep.
So, I mean, that is to some extent passing the buck to the people who are doing the application. But, the treatment of data is very application specific. Mm-hmm. And people have different requirements. And as a platform, what we're trying to do is do the secure connectivity and ensure the data gets from point A to point B securely, and it's authentic. We know which device it came from. It can't be sabotaged in transit and all things like that. But when it gets to the other end, for us, we do kind of hand that off. I mean, because that is, if you're doing a health device or a building or whatever, there are very different requirements for the data. Personally identifiable data is one thing. Health data, is a very interesting point. If data is collected and something is wrongly keyed, and you've collected it from the wrong patient, and it's stored in your health record and then taken as gospel, that could be very, very bad for many applications. And there are some things about health data which are actually, it's unless you're going to do a DNA profile of every person you're taking the heart rate off, how do you know it was that person? How do you know there hasn't been a mix-up or someone moved the wires or whatever? Yeah. There's a lot of issues there. But for us, really, we talk about that to some extent, but it really is the job of the application for us. There are people, Google have a lot of stuff where the data comes from them, and they're the custodians. So they have the more holistic. We probably have a much better point of view on data management as such and privacy. Mm.
So in terms of, if we accept that IoT is going to happen, again, we can argue the numbers as to how quickly, but if we accept that it is, what do you think are some of the key next steps that organizations, maybe your organizations, but organizations generally, industry needs to look at to ensure that as we move forward with IoT, security isn't seen as a barrier to stopping its adoption at scale?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I think that as all of these things come together, you're going to have sensitive data like this health data. And it may even be things from a Fitbit or things that seem a little bit less dangerous now, like your steps or your heartbeat. But it does ultimately count as very sensitive data to users because it can be abused in some way. And so it's really important that as these objects are interconnected, you make sure that those systems that have the most sensitive data are protected very well. But you also need to make sure that the things that are less or more accessible. So inside of a smart home, you may have your thermostat or other device that's inside, and someone has to get in through a locked door to get access to it. But as the homes become more smart and things get more interconnected, you don't want to end up in a situation with smart locks and smart windows, smart sprinklers, where someone can then say, okay, well, that sprinkler's not protected. It doesn't have great data protection, and so I'm going to hack your sprinkler to find out what's going on with data in your bathroom. And that's not a situation anyone wants to be in. Now, these devices are going to be made by different manufacturers, different companies, and so I think that it's critical that the companies have transparency about what protocols they use and are collaborative so that there's cross-industry cooperation to make sure that they can all speak to each other, use the same data protection techniques and processes in order to protect that data together.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
And there's some stuff on data visibility which I think would be really interesting. I think it is having someone to come up with a way to authenticate and define ownership, essentially, the data. Because if there's health data being collected, again, it's kind of address the problem. If you can see your health data, even if it's being collected for your insurance company, if you can see it because you have the rights to that data, there's a lot of stuff about data rights which I think helps this problem a lot, because then people can look back at their data history. But that's something which, because it's so inter-vendor, it's a very contentious area as to who can build this system, how it can work, and it's almost like you want this sort of Bitcoin-style decentralized cryptographic way of establishing ownership and viewability and permissions. Because as a individual, I would love to see all the stuff the stuff in my house is talking about, to an abstracted level. But vendors would have to go, this data is being sent, and if it's just a black box, then consumers will go like, well, I want to know what that is, and that'll force more openness, and also you won't get the problems of an app on my phone is sending the address books off somewhere because it's not all a black box. People deserve to know, and there's a lot of stuff in Europe more about data ownership, I think, I think data ownership is going to be one of the things which really liberates this, and it's not actually about locking it down. It's actually, it will make it better and more open, because if people can see it, they'll be less afraid of it. Right now, there's a lot of fear because you don't know.
Yeah, so a lot of this is about privacy. I think the cybersecurity implications are actually very deep and interesting. We talk to a lot of enterprises, and we've heard this number that somewhere between 2 and 5% of traffic on the average network is actually malicious traffic. So, the old days were firewall up, keep the bad guys out. Then it was, I want to do intrusion detection to detect when the bad guys are in there. Now the bad guys are pretty much in there all the time. It's more about understanding what's going on, and that's a really deep challenge for companies. But now you roll in IoT and a 1,000-fold increase in devices, where there'll be some from very trusted vendors where you can really trust the hardware, but many could be doing pretty subtle things on your network that you might not be aware of, and you've got a whole new set of sort of potential attack vectors inside your organization. And so I think that this is an interesting, challenging thing. I think that it means it just pushes us further down the road, where we accept that you need a multi-layered kind of rich cybersecurity environment where you're sort of detecting patterns. It's a continual arms race. The arms race just sort of increases here. But from our perspective, from our side, we think about a lot, of how do you capture all the data, not just of what the data being generated by these devices, but then the actual network traffic, the kind of the data, the endpoint behavior, so you can start to see when and kind of roll back in time and look at patterns where somebody might be beaconing, or where there might be things talking to each other in ways that you wouldn't expect, or you can start to kind of have visibility. I mean, essentially, what happens on your network with all these devices becomes a big data problem, and you need both sort of those real-time algorithmic type approaches, and then the human ability to go dig deep and see the patterns and explore and reason about what's going on inside your network.
So do you think we'll get to a scenario, if I understood correctly, where the poached, i.e. the people that are being attacked within this environment of IoT, could actually utilize that to become and start to poach or look at others that are potentially applying attacks? And with all that connectivity, all that visibility, of all those things out there, can we actually start to use that to our advantage in a secure way?
I'd probably take a slightly different twist, and this is a little bit sort of futuristic, but I could imagine a digital home of 5 years from now where you might have hundreds or thousands of internet-connected devices, and there might actually be, 1 in 10 is actually compromised and malicious in one way or another, but it's just part of the network, and your network takes care of it, and it actually still does its productive work. It's not actually damaging. It's just that you need to have, it's more like the nervous system. You kind of need to have that enough control so that you assume that a bunch of these devices are going to be trying to probe around and try to play games, and that's sort of okay.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like, it's always a good approach. The firewall approach worked for a while.
Yep.
But now it's gone to always encrypted, authenticated links between every device, no matter where it is, whether it's in a data center or whether it's in a home. You treat your home network like it is compromised, and you'll be much better off. That means no Windows shares and stuff like that because they're not encrypted. Yeah. But luckily technology and everything is catching up with that, and it becomes a much easier problem now because all computers can deal with encrypting every connection. Mm-hmm. There's still the issues of what happens inside the device, but that's usually a physical access issue. So that's still, don't let people break into your house physically.
Right. I think that expanding further on that, when you have these devices all operating independently, that you're still going to have these central management systems, and these management systems are ones that have the ability to do scans and make sure that the binaries that are running on any of these devices are signed, to make sure that that software has been vetted in the right way, and to knock other ones off the network, not gain as much access, have read-only access so they can't write into these other devices if they're somehow compromised or trusted less. And that requires each of those different manufacturers to have those different kind of fail-safe modes where they can go back and say, okay, well, I'm not recognized by this network, so I have limited abilities to do things or read data or transmit in some way.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine having a Wi-Fi access point that will just deny association to devices that have proven to be bad. So they just can't join the Wi-Fi network. And the other, they can then do denial of service attacks if they're that intelligent. But you know, you can actually shut stuff off at source in quite a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's hard though. If we can't secure a USB stick, securing a IoT device is a challenge, you know?
I think you can secure USB sticks. It's just that people haven't. No one thought it was a problem until it was.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings up an interesting question. I mean, do you think people fully understand the risk that is potentially out there if they don't take the right approach? And if we assume that you know, some of these things can be addressed fairly easily, and I think in a large number of cases, there are some very simple steps that organisations and individuals can take. But do you think there is enough awareness around that? And you know, if not, you know, what can we collectively do as an industry to help? Because we all stand to benefit in a number of different ways by helping drive the adoption of IoT. So how can we potentially go about and help people better understand the opportunity, but also at the same time the risk if they don't take the right steps?
I mean, there's been some stuff, there were sort of discussions at various security conferences about like, hey, we need a logo or something for, you know, like a UL logo for security approval. But the problem is that, you know, all of the current product approvals are points in time. You know, you have something that's determined to be electrically safe by surveying, you know, a number of pre-production prototypes, and you go, this is fine, they're mass producing them. The problem is that doesn't reflect the reaction time and the ongoing type thing. You know, it would be nice to have a logo on something which says, you know, these guys patched within 3 days of every vulnerability found, and that you can take the certificate away from them if they don't. Because, you know, consumers do tend to buy cheap things. And, you know, I buy cheap Chinese security cameras around my house because, hey, they work pretty well, but I don't treat my home network as secure anyway. But, you know, I don't know what version of Linux they're running on there, and they seem to have quite a lot of open ports.
Yeah, educating users is very difficult. There's, you know, it takes a lot of work to make something so simple that all users can understand it, especially if they're not you know, experts in security and privacy or computer science professionals. And so it's really important to like really look at the design of the overall system, the design of the interfaces. There's a lot of great systems out there that have very clean designs, but it's really important that we continue to simplify those designs and not have numerous ways to look at the same data unless the users are power users and have declared themselves as such and want to look at all of the additional data. They need to be able to kind of progressively opt in to the more complex setup and kind of then choose to be the one who's in charge of their security and privacy concerns. Otherwise, I think it's best just to give them as simple of an interface as possible so that they can get the value that they want in exchange for the data that is collected, in exchange for the money that they've spent on purchasing these devices.
Yeah, I think we're going to get there with sort of that automatic management and sort of for more advanced cases, the analysis of what's going on in the network. I mean, personally, I would lean towards trusted vendors, you know, people who you know are building devices that are secure, that have good practices on, you know, software development and patching and management, and be aware that if you're in a position where you're trusting your firewall, then anything you're putting behind your network that isn't that today is probably rolling the dice. But know that I think that where we're going, I honestly think it's unrealistic to expect that all these devices are going to be trusted and secure in that manner, and patching becomes an almost impossible problem. There's going to be this legacy of devices that are at various different levels of sort of security capability, and I think that we just need to, over the next few years, start to build out the environments that can kind of bake that in as an assumption.
I guess the challenge here, particularly for you know audience here at the Web Summit, in some instances you're going to have startups coming through that don't have that pedigree, that background to rely on. Well, you know, we're a trusted brand because they're an unknown quantity.
Yeah.
Is there a way in which, you know, again, this is a difficult question to answer, I appreciate, but is there a way in which a startup can start to at least address some of those concerns that may exist around security? Because there is no pedigree to call upon. I mean, you may be able to talk about individuals that have worked elsewhere at organizations that bring that credibility, but as a startup, it's difficult, surely.
I mean, I would hope that, Google or other vendors could potentially lead in helping. I don't know. I mean, it's a challenge for there to be at this level of innovation without that level of sort of the ecosystem being built out. I mean, I think today, you know, most people who are adopting these devices are early adopters. They're probably more sophisticated as well. And honestly, most of the threats are pretty theoretical at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just, I think we're maturing, and I think that we'll need to get to those standard management and APIs and intelligence detection and all these things in a way that the average user can kind of comprehend. They don't have to be experts in computer science to get there before this kind of gets too serious. And I think that's the journey we're on as we mature this industry.
I think that's to an extent, that's why we built a platform like this, so that in theory, people building on the platform, they get a certain level of security, and they get a team that is very interested in security, not in making products, just securing a platform. And our platform and others provide this base, which you can still make something insecure, not at a local network level, but on the data security, based on your implementation. But the point is, if you start with a good base, you can be secure all the way to the top. If you don't start with a good base, you're lost. One little exposed JTAG or not locked down memory, and physical security, key management, protocols, everything. It can be broken on the way up. And if you start with something which has been audited and so on and is good, then that's a good start. It's not the whole story, but it does allow startups to actually have less worries in that region, and big companies as well.
Yeah. This is the same. The analog there is for web architecture, having Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud Platform there to take away all the necessity for you to understand about cycles and computation and and security and privacy management. And so these platforms you're talking about, you're creating, are really a step in that direction. And I think to add to that, there's also just the creation and adoption of protocols for secure transmission of data and reliable transmission, so you don't have to be spammy and lossy and worry about developing your own intercommunication protocols along the way.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, I think we're spot on from a timing point of view. So Ben, Hugo, Dan, thank you very much for your time and your insight. Thank you.
Thank you.